Good morning. All right. Let's continue with the LDS stories of faith and courage. This is still James H Martineau and his experiences during the pioneer times. A time of fear and death. In the summer of 1882, the small village or hamlet of Show Low in Apache County, Arizona, stood upon the banks of the creek of that name, which is one of the tributaries of the Little Colorado River. Show Low obtained its peculiar name from the following circumstance. The whole surrounding county was possessed by two men, Gentiles, whose herds roamed over its grassy hills and vales, but who after a time began to disagree, feeling that the estate, though large enough for one, was not big enough for two. They finally agreed that its sole ownership should be decided by chance. Sitting by a rude table in their cabin, after having been for some time engaged in card playing, they agreed to shuffle well the cards. Each one cut, he could show low to own the whole ranch. This they did, the loser departing contentedly to seek pastures new. And so from this little game of show low, the place took its name. Only 8 Mormon families dwelt here, and as farmland nearby was limited in area, some of the men took up farms in the timberland, or forest, as it was called, some miles away. Among these were John Reedhead and wife, and B. Samuel Johnson, and Elvira his wife, daughter of the J. H. Martineau formerly, and for many years a resident of Logan City, Utah, who took adjoining farms about 7 miles from Show Low. Here they built a double-log house in which both families lived during the time of planting, cultivating, and harvesting their crops. When this labor was over, they would then return to the little village. It was about the 1st of June when the following tragic scenes were enacted. It was a season, apparently. Just a second. I love this dust cover. I want to preserve it. So, there we go. It was a season, apparently, of the most profound peace with the Indians. Not a speck of darkened the sky of the toiling settlers. Not the faintest rumor of impending evil disturbed the quiet of their daily lives. They were busy as bees, clearing land, plowing and planting, fencing and building, and already had made quite a creditable showing in the way of substantial improvement. But all this was suddenly to cease. Trouble, fear, and death were waiting to succeed this time of peace and prosperity. While these two families of Johnson and Reedhead were thus laboring industriously and contentedly upon their lonely farms, unsuspicious of approaching danger, their guardian spirits one day gave them a gentle whisper, not sufficient to alarm them, but which caused them to find a place of safety, unknowing themselves the cause for their action. One morning after breakfast, Reedhead said, "I believe I'll go down to Taylor and get my wagon fixed." Said Johnson, "I think I'll go with you." Then said Miss Reedhead, "If you both are going, I'll go too." "I too," said Miss Johnson. "Well," said Johnson, "let's all go." "Yes," said Miss Johnson, "and take the cows and everything." And so, without any predetermination and obeying a sudden impulse, but without any real or well-defined reason, they did that which, no doubt, saved the lives of all of them. They hitched up their teams, loaded their household gear into their wagons, and with their cows and chickens went to Show Low, intending ere long to return. As the little party thus proceeded on their way to Show Low, Miss Johnson, an experienced pioneer who had already passed through many dangerous and trying scenes with the unflinching courage, relates that she felt a fear and unrest which caused her often to look over her shoulder. A nameless dread, which hastening events soon explained. Arrived at the little village, "What did you come for? Any trouble?" said the surprised people. "No trouble. We just thought we'd come back for a little while." But there was trouble. although they knew it not. The dreaded Apaches had again broken out, and were even then upon the warpath, plundering and scattering settlers' horses and shooting their stock. On Wednesday, June the 1st, Brother Nathan Robinson, a resident of Show Low, was killed by Apaches only a mile and a half from home. Riding peacefully along the road, he saw a small party of Indians gathered about a dead animal not far from the road. He rode up to them, and while examining the dead ox, was murdered and stripped, and his mangled corpse thrown into a creek and weighed down with stones. Although no breath of ill rumor had, as yet, ruffled the peace of the villagers, the wife of the murdered man felt the premonition and alarm for her husband all day, a fear which her neighbors endeavored in vain to dispel. With the streaming eyes and wringing hands, she exclaimed again and again, "My husband is dead! My husband is dead! I know he is killed!" About 2 o'clock the next morning, Sorry, just a second. About 2 o'clock the next morning, this is Mrs. Johnson, I was suddenly awakened by a rough shake of the arm and voice of a boy calling out, "Miss Johnson, it's getting quick. Get up quick and run to the barn. The Indians have broken out. Run quick." And away he sped to awaken others. The night being warm and her husband absent, she had made her bed out of doors upon the ground. Hastily dressing, she snatched up her child and fled to the barn. The rendezvous appointed crossing, in her flight, a deep rocky gulch, upon 2 long, slim poles which lay across it, a feat she would have not dared essay at any other time, and a misstep would result in almost certain death or broken limbs. Arrived at the barn, she found the people all gathered, 3 old men, the rest being women and children, whose husbands and fathers were away from the settlement, who may know the agony of those helpless ones as their night dragged slowly along, the nameless dread that their loved ones already might have been butchered, and the uncertainty as to their own fate. With what intensity is every faculty strained, how many uncanny sounds they hear or think they hear. With what piercing glances they fearfully peer into the surrounding gloom, fancying every now and then that they see dusky forms stealthily approaching. Tears dim their eyes and prayers fill their hearts as mothers look upon their darling children and think with a chill shudder of what has been and what may be again. But while others were in dread, Mrs. Johnson was calm. Her husband and 4-year-old boy were absent and should, as he intended when they went to Taylor, have returned the day previous. No one knew what was hindering his homecoming. Should not she, too, be very anxious? Here is the key to her calmness, a little secret well worth knowing by the youth of Utah. She was a woman of faith, and had been trained from her youth that the Father hears and answers the prayers of those who trust in him. She went by herself and asked that if her husband and boy were all right and should return to her, that she might have the testimony of a peaceful mind and the assurance of their safety. She arose with this testimony in her soul, and thenceforward felt no fear, much to the surprise of her associates, a family fully justified, the next day when her loved ones returned safe and unharmed. The writer mentions that this little incident to impress upon the youth the fact that God is ever willing to hear and answer the prayer of the faith and give peace to the troubled soul. We will here mention that about 11 p.m. it was decided to send a messenger to Taylor 9 miles distant for aid. But who would venture alone upon such a dangerous errand? Should one of the men go, there'd be only 2 left to defend the helpless flock in case of attack. And how could a woman undertake so fearful a risk? But a boy of 14 years, John Reed, had volunteered and went. Every heart was filled with supplication to the Father that he might reach his destination in safety. For who could say that he might not fall into the ambush of skulking savages? As he sped along the rocky road, it seemed to the anxious listeners in the barn that the resounding clatter of his horse's hoofs could be heard for miles, and must surely be heard by the Indians, and bring them upon him. He safely reached Taylor, and informed Bishop Standifried standified of the danger of the people in Sholo. The bishop seized his gun, stepped to the door, and fired his piece as a signal of alarm. As the report echoed through the stillness of the night, men hastily sprung from their beds and hurried to the bishop's to learn what was the matter. A party of 20 men quickly volunteered. Volunteered to go to the relief of Sholo, arriving there about daylight, much to the joy of the waiting ones. But Brother Nathan Robinson had not yet returned, nor did anyone know aught concerning him. Parties well armed went out in search, and were for hours unsuccessful, until someone passing by the crystal stream saw something under the water, under a pile of stones, that drew his attention. It was the body of Brother Robinson, stripped and mangled. Near they found some of his clothing. Tenderly and sorrowfully they laid his stiffened form across 2 horses. So they brought him back to his sorrowing wife and children. Guided the moccasin tracks of his murderers, they found a place where he had been killed, and where he lay still the remains of the ox. They found, too, the trail of his horse, where, unsuspicious of danger, he had turned from the road and ridden up to a place occupied by supposed friends, but instead he rode into the gloom of death. Who may know his thoughts when suddenly assailed, wounded and beaten to the earth? He knew the hour of his death had come, his beloved wife and children to be evermore deprived of his loving, helping hand. But his was not a solitary case in this beautiful southern clime, as has been the fate of hundreds. After some days it was decided to abandon Sholo. The people were there were too few to hold the place, and other settlements near it were not strong enough to furnish constant aid, so willing hands and teams helped move the settlers to places of greater safety, some who never saw their homes again. Mrs. Johnson says that so it was with her and her husband. They abandoned home, farm, crops, a shingle mill, and almost all they had, and were suddenly brought into a state of destitution. But with that innate, impressible vitality so characteristic of Mormonism, they yielded not to discouragement, but again set to work with stout hearts and industrious hands to repair their fortunes. And as it was with them, so it has been with many Mormon pioneers. They have indeed made the desert bloom, but its thirsty soil has been moistened by their tears, and their weary sighs have stirred in pity the leaves of the lonesome mesquite. But now the dawn begins to appear, and the beginning of the end approaches, and soon shall the words of Father Jacob be fulfilled, and his seed and his beloved son possess the land he gave him. Santiago. Interesting. So, of the 2 families that decided, well, we should just go. It was the Reedheads and the Taylors and Johnson. Oh, so sorry. Taylor is the town of Sholo. So Reedhead and Johnson. And it was Mr. Reedhead that had passed. Whereas the other one knew that the other was okay. It's to me that's fascinating. There's a few things to get from this. The first is the testimony of the Spirit that can be had by asking God. The second is I'm always impressed by stories of wives' understanding when either their husband or child is in great distress and at extreme distances. I was told a story by one of the people I met on my mission, where in the dead of night, a mother woke up and she knew her son, who was on a mission across the world, was in danger. And so she asked her and her husband to kneel down and pray. And they prayed for the safety of their child and everything that they could with earnest intent to have their child be safe. In addition to that, they wanted to put their name on the prayer roll immediately of the temple. And seeing all the temples around where they lived in the United States was closed because it was nighttime, like literal middle of the night, they called Australia because I think it was Monday too or something. So the temples aren't open on Monday, plus it was the middle of the night. So they called Australia. The Australian temple, or I think was open, or New Zealand temple. It had to have been the Australian temple. But to get his name on the prayer rolls immediately that day. Come later to find out, about a week later, the experience of the missionary comes by letter that they were in grave peril. I can't remember if it was they were being robbed or they were being threatened with their lives. But I definitely remember the pleading and heartfelt waking up of the mother to try and pray for the child. Now, I've heard several stories like this. Now, you can call it trite, you can call it whatever you'd like, but I absolutely believe there's something to it. I believe there is, and I wish I knew how or why or what develops that. Because there are times where my wife's intuition is extremely keen. There are times where it's way off. But when things are meaningful the most, she tends to be right. So I don't know, I think there's something to it. I'm reminded of the scene in Interstellar, which, okay, so if you've seen Interstellar, it's a great movie. I love it. There's one thing in the writing that makes me go, that how they wrote it is pretty terrible. The concept of it. It's the scene where the girl is trying to, she has a love for this astronaut that went to this other planet, and that she knew that it was the right planet to go to all along, even though it was the least likely because of all these other things that were indicated. And she says that love transcends time and space and all that. And how they wrote it, she was trying to justify it, and she does a really good job. It just doesn't come across right. But I wonder if, to me, how would I have gotten it across? Because I'm like, I believe in these stories. I've seen these kind of things happen. I know that the Holy Ghost can whisper warning, comfort, and give you information on your loved ones. And it's my strong belief that if they had, that continues to occur. I have wonders about, does that strengthen or weaken with certain things, or is it just a gift of God to parents when times are needed, and despite anything that you do with your relationship, it is determined by, the will and blessing of God. I don't know. There's all sorts of things to go into that. But at least when it came to that movie Interstellar, I was sitting here thinking, it would be better if it could be said, if she had articulated her version of, I know that this is the right planet because I have a feeling, and that feeling comes from, you could call it women's intuition, you can call it divinely inspired, whatever you want, but here's these stories, and it is a feeling. And yeah, then Cooper could have mocked her and they could have had the plan go on, but at least it would have sounded a little more based in reality, but a little less scientific. And I'm wondering if that's the problem they had as writers, because here their characters are supposed to be all scientific, but here they're dealing with something that's very intangible, but yet is a very real thing that many people have had. How do you express that? Sometimes you just have to express it as plainly as one person does with another. Look, I love physics, but even I'm going to sit here and go, I could speculate on mechanisms all I want, but it's pure speculation because there is nothing for it. Zero. So whether people become quantumly entangled as they have a relationship, I don't care. That is, you could make whatever up you want, but in the end, it comes down to that the Spirit of God and the Spirit of being parent to child or husband to wife can truly make a union that will testify when something happens to the other person. So I'll leave you with that. All right. A Dance on Sunday, James H Martineau. A dance by Latter-day Saints on Sunday would justly be considered entirely out of order in any well-regulated community, keeping the Sabbath day holy. But one at which the winter took part many years ago is worth mention. It was, the writer. But one at which the writer took part in many years ago is worth mention. It was in July 1851, in Parowan. People were assembled on Sunday afternoon in the log schoolhouse, which was used also for religious and other meetings and dances, which, by the way, was the first house erected in the colony, when Walker, the great Utah chieftain, arrived with a large band of warriors and squaws returning from a predatory expedition on the Colorado River. Walker and Ammon, his brother, came at once to meeting and were invited to seats on the stand and were asked to speak. Walker made a short address in Ute tongue, which this is weird. Okay, sorry. Walker made a short address in Ute tongue, which was interpreted sentence. Oh, they put a period. Oh, that's a smudge. There's a smudge that looks like a period when it should just not be there at all, which was interpreted sentence by Ammon, who spoke English quite well. Sorry to interrupt the story, but notice that there's different tribes that cause different troubles at different times. In the first story, it was the Utes and it was Walker, who was being stubborn, but thankfully didn't draw weapons by just defending themselves properly and right. And here's Walker again being invited to Parowan. In the meantime, it was the Apache that had come through, and it was always the Apache, which were, well, I don't know if I could say always, but at least in all the stories that I've seen, Apache were constantly feared and warlike, and I believe were one of the main tribes in kind of, their territory ranged from Mexico, central Mexico, up to northern Mexico and into what would become the southern United States, and the Texans had a lot of problems with it too. Sorry, I'd gone to the Alamo and seen a lot of their brief history there, so there's a lot to it. Anyway, so Walker had heard much about the Mormon dances, and they were fine, in fact, unequaled, but he had never seen any and would like much to do so. He was told his wish should be granted, and that tomorrow evening we would have a dance in the schoolhouse to which he and his men would be welcome. Walker replied that this would not do, as he was on his way to Salt Lake City and could not wait all that day. Indeed, he could not waste any time in Parowan. For this reason, he asked, and in fact required, that in no uncertain manner that the dance should be given, be given today, this afternoon, immediately. The presiding authorities of the colonies hastily discussed the demands, and as we were nearly 300 miles from any assistance should help be needed in case of trouble, the colony being weak in numbers, it was considered best not to displease the Indians, who knew no difference between Sunday and any other day, and to give them the dance they desired. See? Sorry, I think of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints as a wonderful organization because it understands the needs of the people. That Sunday was made for man and not man for Sunday, as Jesus would say. And so what's the point of being pharisaical about keeping the Sabbath day holy when we're doing something joyful, something wonderful, and to create peace? So accordingly, the meeting was at once dismissed. and a man sent for his fiddle, and all repaired a short distance to level a piece of ground, accompanied by all the Indians, about 100 in number. The fiddler came, a cotillion was formed, and the dance commenced. Not a drop of rain had fallen for months, and our dancing floor, destitute of all vegetation, soon became very dusty, with the energetic tramping of feet and swish of women's skirts. During the second cotillion, one could hardly see the opposite couple for dust, but we all did our best and most artistic dancing to suitably impress our dusky visitors, that they might see that they had not been misinformed as to our ability on the light fantastic toe. Great was our astonishment at the end of the third cotillion, as another set was just forming, when Walker angrily shouted, "Stop! Get off the ground! You don't know how to dance!" The one lied who told me Mormons could dance. They spoke with a forked tongue. Go home and don't try any more to dance till you know how. Not till you know how. Not like papooses. I'll show you how to dance. He spoke a few words, and his men, and about 60 of them, took their places, forming a perfect circle, all facing inward, while a couple of their tom-toms, or rude drums, squatted just outside and began beating time, singing in a monotonous chant, or monotonous, depending on how you want to put the emphasis on the syllable. Monotonous chants, ay-ya, 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 ay-ya. The dance consisted of simply stepping at each drum beat, fist to the right, and then at a special drum thump circling to the left, and so on alternately for about 20 minutes. We were all astonished in all their movements, stepping or changing direction as they circled. There was not the least crowding or jostling or moving in the other as a perfect circle, as if one had been marked on the ground. And to all appearances every foot touched the ground at precisely the same instant. They scarcely raised a dust. When Walker saw he had sufficiently impressed and instructed us, he stopped the dance, saying, "Now you can see how to dance like men, not like papooses who know nothing." And away he and his men went, shortly continuing his way, as if disdaining longer to stay with so uncultivated a set as we were. To an onlooker, our appearance must have been anything but dignified and inviting. Imagine a hot day in July, faces covered in dust and lined with furrows down which coursed streams of perspiration gendered by heat and violent exercise, and clothing with colors indistinguishable for dirt. No wonder Walker looked upon us as disreputable set, unworthy of further notice. Interesting. There's a cultural exchange for you. I find that fascinating. I wonder if I would expect not only is it a type of dancing, but I also think that I'm wondering if moccasins would have helped to not kick up the dust, especially if they were to do so, they're hitting the ground all at the same time, but if they do so in a light manner, He was not impressed by the frill and joviality. He was impressed with syncopation and order. Interesting. There's just totally different mindsets in how things are to be done, and they're cultivated over time. It's like the different sounds that we attribute to different parts of the world in their music, like the scale in which Asian music is done. That when you hear it, this is Asian type music, and if you listen to enough music, you might be able to say, oh, this is definitely of Chinese origin, or this might be Korean, or this might be Japanese, where that might be too subtle for other people. It's just all fascinating, the different things that we can come up with over time, and what we value in those cultures. And the biggest thing that I hope that the culture of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints contributes to is not only an understanding of others' cultures, of what they value, but most importantly, that we cultivate a culture of Christ. That despite whatever minor differences there are, whether it be in music or dancing when we worship or go about our daily life. I hope the culture of Christ, of one of honesty, one of love, one of charity, one of forgiveness to ourselves and to others. I hope that culture has a stronger root than any other. A leap for life or death. This is the last of James H Martineau. It was in the spring of 1851 that the writer, residing in the newly established settlement of Parowan, or Little Salt Lake, as it was commonly styled, conceived the idea of ascending a mountain peak not far away to view the surrounding country. Such an enterprise has always been to him a delight, but in the trip of which we are now speak, he narrowly missed a tragic termination. Young and thoughtless, he took no water with him upon this expedition, and after a toilsome climb of about 5 miles up a long mountain ridge, over jutting rocks and rugged cliffs, found himself at length on the summit, triumphant and delighted, but perspiring at every pore and suffering much from thirst, which was greatly aggravated by breathing through his open mouth as he toiled and panted up the weary ascent. Later on, he learned the importance of keeping his mouth closed under such circumstances, thereby preventing its becoming so dry and parched. When deprived of water, a man can do without it 3 times as long if he will breathe only through the nose, keep his mouth shut, and abstain from talking. But here he was, very thirsty upon a high mountain, and no water within miles. For a while he enjoyed the grand but desolate view extending from Mount Baldy in the distant north to the dim ranges in the west and south, with the newly planted fort at his feet, and the Little Salt Lake 8 or 10 miles distant, the very embodiment of desolation as it lay stagnant and sullen, surrounded by marshy shores of glistening white salt in which no plant can live. This is funny because there's tons of Mount Baldies. Anyway, by the day he waned and must descend. To avoid the long roundabout route by which he had reached the summit, a thought occurred that it would be better to take a shortcut directly down the mountainside. So he entered a slight ravine whose rocky bottom, bare of all vegetation, would afford an easy pathway. Swiftly he descended, every few yards jumping down rocky steps of a few feet, pleased to see how quickly he was reaching the foot of the mountain. By this time the little gulch had grown to be quite a deep one, with walls upon each side, too high and too steep to be climbed. His downward leaps, too, became more frequent and of greater depth, but this was well. He would sooner reach the bottom. At length, a drop of 9 or 10 feet landed him upon a shelf or rocky platform about 10 feet broad, shutting in on each side by high perpendicular walls. Advancing toward the edge, he was horrified to see that his next drop, if he chose to make it, would be into a fearful abyss. Okay, so he's stuck. He's got walls on each side and an abyss in front of him. It was a sheer descent of over 100 feet. Of course, he'd go back a little and take another route. Turning back to the rock he had only now descended, he tried to climb it, but to his dismay, he could not. Although but a few feet higher than his head, the face of the rock was very smooth and had no angles or projections by the aid of which he might ascend. For a long while he strove desperately to climb the rock. He took off his shoes, hoping that his bare feet might give him sufficient hold upon the rock to make his way in vain. His utmost endeavors raised him not more than 1 or 2 feet. Then down he slid. Still he continued, trying first one place, then another, but all to no purpose. Must he die here, when it seemed as if he could almost grasp the top by an upward spring, and once upon its top be safe? It seemed past belief, but it was true. It was impossible to return, and he began more fully to realize his predicament and evident inability to escape. Who may realize his feelings? He knew he was where no man had ever been and lived to tell the story. He was where no one would ever think to look for him, and he was where a call for help could be heard by no living soul. Only the ravens that slowly circled above his head seemed to be concerned in his future fate. He lay flat upon the rock and crawled carefully forward to look below, but a momentary glance filled him with dread no words can tell. Instinctively he shrank backwards, trembling with an ague. Again he looked down. Rough, ragged rocks were there, and must be his lonely bed until the resurrection morn. A large pine tree stood in the canyon below, a little distance from the foot of the precipice upon whose side he hung, so high in air, but its feathery top was far below his level, a full 25 or 30 feet. Of all this he assured himself by several trembling downward glances, for he could endure the sight only for a moment. What must he do? Could he do anything? Must he die a lingering death by starvation upon the little ledge where he now stood? Or should he end all by a plunge to the cruel rocks below that uplifted their jagged arms as if impatient to receive him? How wondrous is human thought! With what lightning speed may thought fly through the mind! It has been said that in a few moments past in drowning, a man's whole life, even trivial things, will pass before his mental vision, and that what he thinks is a minute would require hours in the telling. So now 1,000 thoughts flashed through his mind. Suppose he were to jump. Could he then be sure of instant death? He might be crushed and mangled and still live for a time in torment, perhaps be torn by wild beasts while still alive. He might, numberless were the horrid thoughts that surged tempestuously through his brain. His friends, his orphaned sisters, far away, waiting for years in vain for tidings from their only brother. But he must be cool. He must think. In this dire strait, he needs the use of every faculty, and he must be calm. While he was upon the mountain summit, being fond of the sketching, he had made a hasty view of the scenery spread about him, the fort, the lake, the distant mountain ranges. He thought of this, and proceeded to sketch the view before him. It was indeed a scene worthy of the pencil, and of a better artist of a master. The canyon, several hundred feet deep in its depth, was walled up upon its further side by a precipice, along whose front stood a row of mighty monolithic columns, each more than 100 feet in height, the spaces between worn and seamed and hollowed out by the forests and tempests of untold centuries. Thus they stood mighty and majestic, as if hewn by titanic hands, sentries guarding the portals to the dark abode of gnomes and vengeful spirits of the mountains. In spite of his desperate case, he could not repress a feeling of rapturous awe as he looked upon a scene of such surpassing grandeur, and for a time lost sense of his imminent danger as he drew his little sketch. Probably an hour was thus occupied in making his drawing, which his wife, then to him unknown, still treasures as a sacred memento. His whole attention had been given to the work, and when done, his mind was clear and calm, as today is after the lapse of so many years. Carefully he considered his position, and plainly saw that he must do one of two things: climb the rock behind him, or face a fearful death. Again, with an energy born of despair, he sought to reach the ledge above him, which seemed so near and yet so far, so infinitely far above his upstretched hands. In vain, and almost unwillingly, he admitted the fearful truth. 3 alternatives were now presented: to die where he was of starvation, to throw himself upon the rocks below, and so end all quickly and surely, or attempt to leap into the top of the pine which stood so far below, with almost a certainty of being impaled or torn in pieces upon its unyielding branches, and thus to meet a fearful lingering death. But could he leap far enough out to reach the tree? Another trembling downward glance made him doubt. The pine stood so far from the precipice, it seemed, that he should do his best. He should only brush the outward tips of its branches in his swift descent, and fall at last upon the hungry, waiting rocks. Reader, think what it is to be compelled to choose the time and manner of your death, a fearful, cruel death at best, alone, not a friend to say goodbye as you leave this bright world, to enter that one so mysterious, so unknown. We have been taught something concerning it. We have a faith, a belief. But as to a positive knowledge, who has gained it? Who has visited that unknown clime and returned again to tell its secrets? To know these things, we must ourselves experience the change. How all these thoughts and many more do speed through his mind. But he must decide, and quickly too. If he hesitates too long, hunger and thirst will so weaken him that he cannot make the desperate leap, even should he bring his courage to the point, if he must. Oh, what dread significance does this word must sometimes possess? The sooner the better. If he miss the treetop, it is but death after all, and death comes all sooner or later. What matters it if it comes today or tomorrow or a year hence? Besides, he may reach the tree in safety. He may be able to seize a limb. But if he does, can he hold to it with a grasp powerful enough to assist his descent, falling so far as he must and so swiftly? No matter. He must. With nerves at highest tension, he plants himself at the base of his fatal rock to get as much run as possible. Only 4 steps at best. He starts at the 3rd step. The bottom of the abyss appears in view, and upon the instant his knees lose all their strength, and he is scarcely able to totter back to the rock to compose himself. Let not the reader think him easily shaken or hysterical. Not so. From his boyhood he was accustomed to being in dangerous positions, nor was he ever subject to dizziness, but never before had he been so fearful a position as this. Since that day he has many times faced death, sometimes when he felt assured that each breath would be his last. But then he had company. There was excitement, as with a soldier in battle who falls and scarcely knows he is struck. But it must be. He must leap, even should it be into eternity, and again he essays it, but in vain. When that dreadful depth comes in view, his strength leaves him in spite of his will. He could not help it. Then, when all hope seems fled, did his guardian angel come to his aid, breathing faith to his sinking soul and renewing his hope. He remembered a prediction upon his head made long before by a silvery-haired old man, a prediction as yet unfulfilled. He remembered, too, the promise in the Holy Scriptures, "Ask, and ye shall receive." Faith, though weak and timid, sprang up in his heart and quickly grew to a living power. He knelt and asked for strength to make the leap, for strength to leap out far enough to reach the treetop, and that he might be able to seize a limb and stay his fall. The Father, in his mercy, heard his prayer. He rose to make a last attempt, and now, as he rushed at the dizzy brink, his sinews seemed of steel, his limbs full of strength, all fear and weakness fled. He shot far out into the empty air, an immense leap, and swiftly descending fell into the center of the pine. How it all happened he never knew, for in his downward flight he was, for the time, unconscious of motion, perception, or of trying to see or grasp at anything. But suddenly he realized he was safe. He found himself holding with each hand a separate limb with a grasp like that of death, not a scratch, nor a bruise upon him, not a rent in his clothing. Was not this verily a miracle? So he esteemed it then, and with all these years have not changed his belief. Some will say there are no miracles, that what we term as miracles are simply the result of natural or spiritual forces whose laws are to us unknown. What matter? Nothing can alter the belief of this writer that in this case a power higher than that of mortality gave strength for the prodigious leap and courage to his soul, guided his curving pathway in the mid-air to a spot of safety, directed his hands to and gave him hold of those unseen branches of the pine, and strength to retain his hold and to stay his swift descent. In a word, he believes the God of heaven heard and answered his prayer. Why should he not today, as ages ago? Has he changed? Is he today less merciful than when Daniel besought his aid, or the multitudes of ancient saints in their afflictions? Faith and reason answer no. It was easy to descend the tree limb by limb until the lowest was reached, and to drop from about 20 feet to the ground, the blessed, friendly ground, no longer hungering for a sacrifice. Safe, safe. How feeble are the words in expressing the deeper emotions of the soul. We instinctively recognize this, in such case, by silence, the eloquent sealing of our lips. Before again starting homeward, he carefully estimated as well as he could the height of his rocky shelf above the bottom of the canyon. The pine was a large one, full 4 feet in diameter, and was at least 120 or 30 feet in height. This he judged by the length of the trees of similar size cut by lumbermen near the mills. This, added to the 30 feet between its top and the rocky shelf, would give the distance of 150 feet, and this he believes nearly correct. To follow the canyon to the plain was an easy matter, and he arrived at the fort some time after dark, much to the relief of his friends, to whom his unwonted absence had been cause for alarm. But he did not then, nor till long after, tell anyone of this thrilling experience. His matter-of-fact comrades, accustomed to peril themselves, would have laughed at him and called him a fool for getting into such a scrape. And although his judgment might acknowledge it, his vanity would rebel. To young men, the even tenor of whose life has never brought them into situations so trying, let me say, do not scoff at prayer, nor doubt the overruling power of our Heavenly Father, who is able and willing to hear the prayer of faith and humility, now as in ages past. If you have not this faith, labor for it until you receive it, this precious gift of God, a blessing, a pearl beyond price. He who speaks to you nearing the end of this mortality knows whereof he speaks. Ooh, I guess there's one more of Martineau, which is called Chasing Indians. Let's see. It's a shorter one. So that was his own experience of putting himself in peril. That's actually kind of really cool. Him getting in peril was not smart by any means, but the miraculous outcome of how he was able to escape was a testament to the mercy of the Father. And frankly, I will 100% assuredly agree with him that it was a miracle for several reasons. I mean, if you think about it, he was calmed by the Spirit, which he had shown several times that in his attempts to run up to that, he was not ready for it. Plus, he was remembering his patriarchal blessing, too. So it was faith by prayer, faith by remembering the promise of a patriarchal blessing, and third, faith and trust in the Lord. And when the time came, he had the strength necessary to overcome his fear, and most importantly, skillfully, because 100-foot drop, I mean, in his perspective, he couldn't tell how fast it was. It's just something that was so quick. There are times where things happen that you don't know what occurs and why and how. And I think it'd be one of those, because he doesn't properly sit there and think, hey, I was aiming for this. My mind was completely engaged, and I latched onto those branches. For him, it was along the lines of, I made it right to the center of the tree. I had grabbed both the branches. Does he say he had any? Swiftly descending, fell to the center of the pine. How it all happened, he never knew. For in his downward flight, he was for the time unconscious of the motion, perception, or trying to see or grasp anything, but that he was safe. That gap, I've experienced that. I have experienced that myself. When we were kids, we had there was an elementary school where across a busy road there was a playground, and normally they had a tunnel that went underneath the road to keep the children safe. Well, we were playing there during the summer, so school was closed, so the tunnel was closed. And in trying to run back, my brothers were being nice and trying to figure out a good time that we could cross. And so I was geared up as a little kid. I was like, on the starting line, and I was not looking at the road because my brother was doing it for me. And at one point he says, "Go now." No, wait. But I was off like a shot. And in that, uh, I heard squealing tires and a honk, but as I was in the middle of the road, all I can remember is white. For some reason, I was just running as hard and fast as I can to cross the road. All I remember is white. I was focused on the other side. I did not look left or right. But then I was on the other side of the road, right? Or, yeah, mostly across at least. And, my brothers later, the rest of my siblings crossed and talked about it, and generally speaking, they were very glad nothing happened and such. And we joked a little about it. But it was interesting because I always remembered that. I always remembered that I did not, I do not recall seeing anything other than there being white until I was seeing that I was nearly safe at the other side and putting my feet on the curb. So, that's an entirely different one, and frankly seems a lot different than his, because for me it was just being the stupidity of the child and the mercy of our God keeping me safe. And and in the end, I think there's a lot more to it. There's a few scrapes I've been in that I had been worried about and prayer had seen me through, but all of those were never that perilous. There was a time I was lost at night in the mountains. I was up at a scout camp, and we were doing night games, and I was trying to return to my camp, and I went down a path which I was sure would be the correct direction. But when I got to the lake, it was the most beautiful and terrifying thing to ever happen to me. So I come down to this lake up in the high mountains. There is no moon up at the time, and so all it is the stars above, and it was reflecting off the lake of the water, which was mostly still. And it was glorious because it felt like something had brought up a chunk of the earth into the space, and I was looking down through the world into more of the night sky. It was glorious. But I also knew that this was not the lake I thought it was, or so I assumed. And the reason I assumed that is because, again, when you have no moon up, anything that is not emitting light, like the stars in the heavens, is pure dark, pure pitch black. And so it was the right lake, but the view of it had changed so much because the reflection of the tree line in the lake made it look half as big. And so I was terrified at the idea of I was lost in the mountains around a lake I'm unfamiliar with and didn't know where I was going. Now, unbeknownst to me at that time, it was the correct lake. But by praying and proceeding towards around the lake, because I figured, well, I should just continue around the lake and see if there's anything that seems recognizable, because I swear it should be this, but I don't know. It was one of those things where, just as Martineau was talking about, I felt extremely at peace because of how beautiful the whole scene was. I still remember it as one of the most glorious things I've ever seen, and will never forget it. Yet, at the same time, I was terrified, and but it kept me calm enough. As I proceeded around there, I found some canoes, which meant, okay, so this has to be at least in the right area. And then I saw a light in the distance, and I proceeded towards it, and it was the staff cabin, which was our kitchen. And, proceeded to sit down and tell no one of this beautiful story other than much later on. Because, you don't want to admit how foolish you were of trying to go off an unknown paths in the middle of the pitch black night. There must have been enough light when it was striking it directly to produce somewhat of a path. But there were other nights I spent up there, so maybe I'm mixing up memories, but I do remember that it was nothing but the stars. And that's what made it so magical. because there are times where I remember going back along the same path in the moonlight at a different night. So it's I don't have the same experience as Martineau did, but through different experiences of my own, I can relate to it very clearly, just separate ways. And I hope again, the purpose is to instill faith in the Lord and to have courage yourself, and to reflect on the experiences that you and others have that across time I've seen repeated. To me, it's a testament of how God reaches out to each of us. And may the Spirit of God be with you.